Welcome to episode 79 of the G2 on 5G. It's the latest inside scoop on everything 5G. We cover 6 topics in about 15 minutes, and it's brought to you by More Insights and Strategy. I'm Will Townsend, and joining me again this week is Anshel Sag, and we are welcoming Diana back to the podcast as well. But let's get started with my first topic. So this week, the FCC announced that it was considering some deregulation with respect to low Earth orbit satellite deployments. And so what's the real angle here for service providers? Well, one of the things that the FCC is proposing is, and it's interesting because it's sort of counter to what we've been hearing around the FAA and interference, but let me get to that. My details here. So they're actually, the FCC is considering extending interference protections granted to what they state are existing operators of non-geo satellite services. So they expect that this will help open things up a little bit more and allow more entrance, into the space here. And one of the interesting things that was noted is that, a lot of these regulations were created when it was only the United States government and NASA that was focused on launching satellites and that sort of thing. And obviously with SpaceX and OneWeb and others, that has completely changed, kind of the paradigm in the game there. So I think this is a positive thing. I mean, more competition typically breeds more choice and more innovation, but Anshel, would love to get your input maybe first to start.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I think the thing I'm worried about is really just about how many of these satellites are going to be in space. And what kind of space debris they will create, because there are going to be ones that fail. And on top of that, how that's going to affect the whole astronomy community. And, what happens if a company goes bankrupt and they've got a bunch of satellites up in the air? What are the obligations to them when they've got, let's say 1,500 of these small satellites in LEO? So I think there needs to be a little bit of more regulation on these LEOs, but I think loosening up some regulations probably will make it easier for companies to create these satellites and reduce the cost of deployment. But ultimately, I think just having these up in the air, floating, and having too many could be a risk as well. So I don't know what you think, Diana, but I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Well, I think you stole my thunder, that's for sure. Yeah, I was actually going to make the same point about there being a lot of space debris, and just I think it's important to note the sheer number of satellites that are in all of these constellations. I mean, the example you gave was 1,500. I think SpaceX, their constellation, once they have the whole thing up, it's like a couple thousand. It's like, 2,000 or 3,000, and that's just them. That's not counting all of the other players who are looking to get into this space, OneWeb. There are a ton of other people, and not just for LEO, right? LEO aren't the only satellites up there. You also have folks who are putting satellites up to do some monitoring, to do measurements of radio frequencies on the Earth, which I've interviewed a company about that. That was super interesting. So I think as the FCC approaches this, they need to think about all the other players that are up there. It's not just about satellite broadband, which is a really cool use case and can connect a lot of people who otherwise might not be connected. But they obviously have a lot of different angles they need to consider as they move forward.
Absolutely. Good insight, Diana. Yeah. And, and eventually once they figure out, some of the latency challenges, I think satellite could be, low Earth orbit satellite could be appropriate for supporting 5G backhaul and autonomous driving, where you're getting ubiquity of that backhaul. But I know, Diana, you want to talk about Verizon. They've been on quite a tear with respect to investing in mobile edge computing, and they announced a new partnership with Google, right?
Yeah, so they added Google Cloud to their list of cloud partners for 5G mobile edge computing. They are already working with AWS and Microsoft. And this, to me, kind of seems like a pretty significant win for Google Cloud, because they've been working really hard to grow the cloud business at Google. And I think in Q3, for example, they managed to increase cloud revenue 45% to just around 5 billion. It was around 3.44 in Q3 of last year. So they're growing at a pretty quick clip. And all of the stuff I've seen or some of the analysis I've seen has indicated that they really need to prove themselves in terms of winning big accounts. And to me, Verizon is a big account. One of the things I'm interested to learn more about is whether operators can really trust the cloud, right? I mean, I think it's a fair question to ask, given Amazon just had that huge outage. I think it was last week by now, and then
they
had
had
another
another
brief.
one.
Yeah, they had another
there-
blip, and so maybe for Verizon, I know Verizon has said in the past that there are certain functions of the network that they're not going to be putting in the public cloud. They're going to keep those private. But for a company like, I think AT&T, who I think is really, going at this full on, I think it's a different story. And I think people need to be just a little bit careful, because it seems like we're putting a lot of really critical systems all in one place. I don't know, Anshel, what do you think?
I think that there's definitely some validity to saying that Google's this is a big deal for Google in terms of winning, but I will say they're the last ones to win Verizon out of the big three.
Yeah.
So it's kind of an indicator of their current place in the market when it comes to telecom. And I would also say that you're right, the cloud is not infallible, and there should always be some form of backup to address that. And I think that everybody who had any kind of Amazon device that was connected to AWS wasn't able to use it that day when AWS went down on the East Coast. So the way I look at it is there's definitely some fallback that needs to be built into place for these things, whether it be the cell network or applications that are just running off the edge cloud. So I think it's absolutely a valid concern, and I think there needs to be some more redundancy built into these systems.
Will, do you have anything to add before we jump to Anshel's first topic?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with what the two of you said. Google has certainly been in third place, and that this is a nice win for them. But certainly from my perspective, Verizon is wanting to leverage across all of the big public cloud providers with respect to their MEC deployment. And it's probably to ensure ubiquitous service, as we've been speaking about, as well as just leveraging the kind of the OpEx spend there as well. Diana, you mentioned AT&T. They're betting big, putting 5G core in the cloud, but it's not infallible, and there will definitely have to be redundancies and backups. But completely agree with both of your insights. Back
to you, Anshel, for your first.
Absolutely. So I wanted to talk about yet another 5G uplink record. We have been talking about 5G downlink for a long time, and there's all kinds of big numbers people are throwing out, but very little has been talked about uplink until this year. And we already heard about 711 megabits per second. We heard about 500 megabits per second going back later this year or earlier this year. And now we're talking about 986 megabits per second. And this was a record achieved by Ericsson, Telstra, and Qualcomm. It was using Ericsson equipment, utilizing Ericsson's unique 4-component carrier aggregation, which aggregates 4 contiguous 100 megahertz bands of mmWave together with a 100 megahertz channel of 3.6 gigahertz midband using a Qualcomm X65 5G modem. And they were able to achieve this near gigabit upload speed, which I don't think anyone's really ever expected to be possible on 5G. But having that kind of shows how amazing 5G can be on the throughput side, both down and up, with the right bands and carrier aggregation. And it's not really that big of a story, but I think it's important to understand that there are big improvements coming on the uplink side as well as the downlink. And there are lots of interesting applications that could benefit from potentially a gigabit uplink that otherwise wouldn't have been possible before, including potentially, 8K broadcasts, which, we don't even really have 4K broadcasts right now. A lot of those are upscaled. So I think the TV broadcast community could really benefit from having millimeter wave 5G uplink, and being able to broadcast live 8K video. And we were at the Qualcomm Snapdragon Tech Summit a couple weeks ago, and they were showing an 8K demo of a live 8K broadcast back and forth video chat, and that wouldn't be possible without a really crazy uplink. So I'm excited to see where this goes, and hopefully we'll see it, in other places, and with millimeter wave penetration improving on Verizon and potentially other carriers around the world, this could be a possibility in more places. But it's important to remember this is still fairly tied to millimeter wave. Diana, I don't know how you feel about this, but I'd love to hear.
Well, I don't want to be the wet blanket, but I'm going to be the wet blanket. So this is really cool. Don't get me wrong. This is really cool. A gig uplink is crazy to think about, considering, what is it? The benchmark even for fixed broadband is like 3 right now, 3 megabits per second. Granted, I think the FCC is looking at changing that but even the higher level that's seen in some of the broadband bills for, again, fixed broadband is 100. So this blows that out of the water. That is awesome. But you have to think about it in a real world context, right? Like, how many people are really, really, really deploying millimeter wave in the way that Verizon is? Not that many. How many people have, what is it? It's 4 different 100 megahertz channels. So 4, and then a fifth. So
Yeah,
500 megahertz. Yeah.
It's 400 in the millimeter wave, which I think is possible contiguously.
Yeah.
I think that having the 100 as well on the midband plus the millimeter wave, I think it's viable. But to your point, it's a lot of spectrum.
Yeah. Well, and the thing is like it kind of circles back to even just looking alone at that 100 megahertz midband channel. I mean, how many people? This goes back to the C-band discussion, right? If you don't get C-band up there, nobody has that except for T-Mobile.
Mm-hmm. And
they've kind of been all poo-poo on millimeter wave. So if you're looking at who has the right mix of this spectrum to do this, it'll take some time before this actually becomes something in the wild rather than just something you can do theoretically that's really cool. And so that's my wet blanket speech. Will, I don't know if you have anything maybe more upbeat to add.
Well, the one thing I'll add, I mean, you guys covered the tech perfectly. I continue to be impressed with Ericsson's execution, even in these POCs. And Anshel and I have spoken, about Ericsson relative to their traditional, incumbent competitors. They continue to demonstrate, from my perspective, they're savvy. They're investing quite a bit in 5G with various labs and efforts and that sort of thing. And this just points again to how strong Ericsson is positioned. Not that Nokia and Samsung aren't doing well, but certainly Ericsson, in my mind, is in the pole position, with respect to a lot of these POCs that we're seeing. So I'll be a little more positive.
Well, I think that takes us to your second, right?
Yeah, that's a good segue to my second. So I want to talk about transport. And there was news released this week that Ciena is taking a lot of Huawei's lunch money, particularly in Europe and in India. And so it's no secret that Huawei's had a very strong optical business. And so what Ciena is reporting is that, given the pivot away from Huawei, on a global basis, that now Huawei is starting to see some cannibalization within their optical business. So Ciena was quoted as saying that they experienced 13% year-over-year growth in these core markets of Europe and India. And what's also interesting, I was recently on a Cisco call where their mass scale infrastructure group was talking about optical and how they've really been growing that business, tremendously. So it seems to me that not only Ciena, but companies like Cisco, who are, Cisco is also very strong in optical, is really taking some share. So, what are the negatives there? I mean, you're forcing out someone as a competitor. Typically, when you do that, sometimes economics, cost points rise, that sort of thing. Certainly Huawei has been a pretty prolific patent filer. I think, in Europe, they were either number 1 or number 2. And again, like patent counting, in my opinion, is not an indication of innovation, but certainly here's another area where Huawei is getting squeezed. And, Anshel, I know you and I have talked a lot about this dynamic, but would like to get your input and perspective there.
Yeah, I think Pandora's box has been opened when it comes to Huawei. And I think once the momentum against Huawei has occurred, I'm not really sure what other avenues they have left. There's going to be a certain number of markets that they're purely limited to because of these government actions. So there's not really much that they can do. But I guess the only positive aspect of this is we have more companies in the market taking over their share, as opposed to one company replacing another. And a diversity of vendors is a good thing for the industry. But that's all I can think of that's really a positive of this, because I'm just not really a big fan of government regulation where it's not necessary or there isn't concrete evidence supporting it. I don't know. What do you think, Diana?
Well, I mean, I'm not entirely surprised that Ciena is seeing these kind of gains. If I'm not mistaken, I'm pretty sure they've talked pretty openly. And if it wasn't them, it was one of the other optical vendors. Talked pretty openly about going after Huawei's share in the market, because now's the time, and why not, right?
Yeah.
So I'm not surprised to see it. I don't know, to your point, what Huawei can do now, to kind of stay afloat, because they're kind of getting killed on all sides. So, I mean, not too much else from me there, but, I'm, again, not really surprised to see it. And I wonder how much more they're going to lose before the day is out.
Yeah, and I think what they're going to have to do, I mean, they're sort of their last stand is building their enterprise networking, business in those countries, and it's primarily going to be China, where they're still accepted. But certainly when it comes to cellular infrastructure and now optical, it's not boding well for them. But Diana, let's go to your second topic, and you want to talk about T-Mobile this week.
Yeah, so I just thought it was interesting. I wanted to kind of drop a little line about how they're kind of speeding up their 5G site upgrades. I think they had said at a recent conference that they've added new 5G radios to more than 900 sites in 1 week. That seems like a pretty, healthy clip. So I'm wondering, are they doing this just to kind of capitalize on their lead, while AT&T and Verizon are kind of hamstrung with C-band because of what's going on with the FAA? And I don't want to keep bringing every conversation back to C-band,
Right.
but that's where we're at. So I don't know if you found anything interesting in this, Will, but what do you think?
Yeah, I would tend to agree with you. This is probably Neville and team, pouring on the mojo, because they're not limited in mid-band, right? They have those assets that came from the Sprint acquisition, and their 2 biggest competitors are paused right now. So so this is an opportunity for T-Mobile to continue, deploying out the infrastructure. What do you think, Anshel?
So I actually have an anecdotal story about this. I've been traveling for the last month nonstop, so I haven't been home. And I was in New York, and I was blown away because New York is like their it's their crown jewel. So I'm not generally that impressed with what happens in New York, because it's always been their best market. But I got 665 megabits per second inside my hotel room, looking into other buildings. So it wasn't like I was looking into a park, and I had like 12 millisecond ping. I was super impressed by that. Lo and behold, I come home after this month of travel, and I look at my phone, and I start having T-Mobile mid-band everywhere, places I didn't see it before, places it hasn't been in at all in the last year. not only that, but I pull out my phone because I see it in yet another place where I didn't have it before. I just randomly run a speed test and I get a gig. And I'm like, what?
Crazy.
I'm getting a gig in the middle of suburbia. This is not downtown San Diego. This is
Yeah.
not some dense urban area. This was just on a freeway off ramp. And I was like, okay, I guess they really made some significant upgrades in my area in the last month. So that's kind of like an anecdotal proof point to their network is accelerating, and it's not really like a it's a hockey stick upgrade path. So we've seen them upgrading. They did that 200 million pop announcement, and that sounded impressive. And I didn't really get the chance to really experience it because I was stuck in basically the same place, or in like 4 places over the last month, and I never went home. And when I got a gig on my freeway off ramp, I was just like, what? So yeah, that's my anecdotal story for their 5G network upgrades. It's absolutely bonkers.
It's kind of crazy to see, but that's a perfect jump into your second story. Speaking of speed testing.
Good one. I did not do that on purpose. So Ookla, which is the parent company of Speedtest, and is very commonly known within the industry for providing user-based connections. They acquired RootMetrics, which is another 5G / network coverage provider. And yeah, it's a big deal because they're competitors. And RootMetrics has a very unique position in the market because their methodology has kind of always favored Verizon in their testing, or at least from my experience has favored Verizon. And I think Verizon's always liked their test results, so that there's a little bit of a positive feedback loop there. But I think what's interesting about the acquisition is it will allow for people to get more comprehensive kind of experience in terms of what the network results will be. Because I think when you combine a RootMetrics methodology with Ookla's real-world user speed tests, I think there's a really interesting opportunity there for a more comprehensive network solution kind of thing. But it also removes one company from the competitiveness of this. And I've always kind of gone like, okay, let's see RootMetrics, let's see Ookla, let's see OpenSignal, and kind of marry the three together to get a kind of an idea of what's going on. So now that we have two of them kind of melding together, I'm not really sure how that will balance things out. But I think it's an interesting thing, and it's going to make a big difference in how people perceive 5G coverage and speeds. I'd love to hear your thoughts, Will.
I just, I hope it doesn't sort of, homogenize, to your point, the evaluation and the testing, because it seems, I mean, you follow this more closely than I do, but it just seems like, these different, companies that do these speed tests, like they have different criteria, some are in cars, some do this, some do that. And so there isn't sort of a consistent recipe for doing this. So to your point, my hope and expectation is that the two of these companies coming together doesn't homogenize things or, limit, kind of, the parameters. So, I mean, that's just my 2 cents. Diana, what do you think?
Yeah, so I mean, back to your point, Anshel, about there being one less competitor, I just kind of also want to reiterate that they had totally different methodologies. One was crowdsourced, one was drive testing, which, to your point, the drive testing tends to favor Verizon. Mm-hmm. I think they said at first they're going to maintain the separate brands. So it'll be interesting to see how long it takes them to marry those two data sets. One of the other things I'm interested to see is who decides to claim statistics from the new company, right? Because there's clearly a very big gap in who uses what, Ookla, RootMetrics, OpenSignal, when they're bragging about their coverage. They all use a different one because that's the one that's best for them.
Favors them, yeah.
Yeah, and it'll be interesting to see how the two that usually use Ookla and RootMetrics decide which statistics to cherry pick. So I'll be keeping an eye on that for sure, but that's really the only thing I had to add. I think there's a bonus topic.
Yeah, Anshel gets a bonus topic.
Yes. So I'm not that special, but I will say I have a bonus topic, which is the 5G, anti-5G products are back in swing. One of them was actually made it to the BBC News an hour ago, which is why I'm adding this as a 5G bonus topic. They said that they found some necklaces and accessories claiming to protect people from 5G mobile networks were actually found to be radioactive, which is the biggest, most thing ever. The Dutch Authority for Nuclear Safety and Radiation Protection, ANVS, issued a warning about 10 products it found that gave off harmful ionizing radiation. So not only is it not doing what it's supposed to do, it's actually doing exactly what it's not supposed to do. And they said that there was a bracelet from a company called Magnetics that had an energy armor product that was giving off radiation. And there have been multiple inquiries in the UK, and there's things we found on Amazon. But our G2 on 5G podcast Twitter account got followed by one of these companies called 5G Guard, or 5Guard actually, and they sell EMF protection mosquito nets, baby bed covers, baby stroller covers, protection curtains, maternity belly bands, and burqas, hijabs, beanie hat, regular hats, men's underwear to protect that special area, as well as EMF protection sleeping blankets. As you can imagine, all these products are outrageously expensive. The EMF protection sleeping blanket is $850. I will not be going out and buying that and testing it. But yeah, these, for the holidays, there's people out there who are selling these 5G protection products, and some of them happen to be radioactive.
Crazy. Well, I've got no comment. What about you, Diana?
My comment is that I think things that are predatory and that play on people's fears in that way are just awful.
Yeah.
You're bilking people out of hundreds of dollars at a time when a lot of people probably don't have that much to spare. Like,
True.
What's wrong with you? You want to have a conversation about, what different spectrum bands have on an impact, like on impacting people's health. That's one thing. If you're just going to throw about the term 5G and say 5G is killing people, like that has no basis in fact, has no basis in science. Like, get out of here.
Yeah.
I mean,
crazy.
Yeah, unfortunately, I really hope no one in my family buys me any 5G protection products for Christmas or for New Year.
You don't want to be protected from 5G. You want the 5G.
I know. Well, that's the thing. Like, I have some friends and family that make jokes, but they know I have a 5G podcast, so they're definitely having jokes. And I might get a joke 5G, gift probably this holiday. But I really enjoyed our conversation.
Yeah.
And I'm going to wrap up the podcast this week and say that we hope our viewers and listeners found this week's topics interesting. If anyone out there would like to provide insights on a specific 5G topic for a future podcast, please reach out to us on social media. Diana is at Dia Marie's Beat, Will is at Will Townsec, and I'm at Anshel Sog. We hope you have a great weekend, and please tune in again next week.